name is Kristen, and this is my story. My idea of marriage was finding Prince Charming, a godly man, and someone who would love me and never leave me. This was a dream that I didn't think was going to happen because I was already divorced once, and I was a single parent of 2 children. Then I met Sean, and I invited him to church. Didn't think he was going to go, just put it out there, but he also got saved. The next morning he woke up and he said, either we need to get married or we need to go our separate ways, but I can't start my forever walk with God living in sin. Wasn't the ideal way that I thought one should get asked, do you want to get married? But he had put God first, and that was more important. So then, by the end of the day, we were married. And then life started happening, and we had unresolved hurts, a death of a child. We had a lack of communication, anger, jealousy, and a lot of unforgiveness. And what happened is that through all of that, then the day came, the day that I found out that Sean was addicted to pornography. What I thought was my dream quickly became a decade of nightmares. Within 12 years, he had stepped outside of our marriage 4 times. The last time he moved out, leaving 5 kids, a very angry, bitter, and confused wife. A couple of months into it, I tried to figure out how could this happen, only to think what was wrong with me, and here again, divorce was on the horizon. And I was blind to my own sin by keeping a record of wrongs, reminding him of how my great expectation of marriage had been shattered, and I never let him live that down. Then God asked me to call him and ask him to forgive me. And I said, but God, he left me. He hurt me. He shattered our family by his addiction. And then God reminded me of my sin. So I called him. He was in Chicago, and I was living in Tennessee with the kids. And so I called him and I asked him to forgive me, only to be questioned back, why are you asking me this? I should be asking you for forgiveness. And I had explained to him how God had showed me my fault, my part in the breakdown of our marriage. And so then I thought surely after that God was going to start fixing things, that, things are going to start being restored. Well, 6 months later, we were still separated. And then a year after that, the divorce, I had been saving up little by little. The divorce was already paid for, and the divorce was coming soon to be final. And I told God that I realized instead of waiting on him and doing things his way, I moved ahead of him. And out of my own pain and in my own rationalization and justification of what had happened, that I truly didn't seek him before I filed for the divorce and before it was truly paid for. So I told him, I said, God, please forgive me and have your way. And if I've walked before you, and I know I have, then help me to correct this. So then I was getting ready to move here with me and my 5 kids, and the phone call came, and it was my husband. And he said, I'm ready to be a family again. These words I had waited 1.5 years for. So I went to Atlanta, I picked him up. We moved up here together as a family. We got here on a Thursday. We then ended up, a lady invited us to her church, and we ended up going. And during that service, something happened to Sean. He went forward and he got before the Lord crying out for forgiveness as he had first seen the hurt and the pain and the anger that not only I had, but our kids had. And so men came around him and they prayed with him. And the man that God had showed me in the beginning, somehow his heart was renewed. The many, many years that he had said, I'll put God first, he did that day. And he came back where I was standing and he said, forgive me. Forgive me for everything that I've done, right there in front of church, right there in front of everyone. It didn't even matter. And then it didn't stop. We went home and he got before his knees to each child and he asked for forgiveness. And he said, I've done so much wrong that I don't deserve to be forgiven. And then God brought truly to my mind that when we honor God and that when we put Him first and we truly forgive others, even when it doesn't make sense, or even forgive the unforgivable or love what's unlovable about them, that is true forgiveness. And then it became clear, and we've heard it so many times before, forgiveness is setting the prisoner free, realizing that you are the prisoner. And that's my story.
My name is Michelle, and this is my story. I'm addicted to crack. Those are 4 words that a mother never wants to hear. A mother of 2 boys that are 15 and 16 years old. Although it wasn't my children that told me that, it was my husband at the time. My husband was a music minister and had served at various churches for nearly 24 years. We had dated for 7 years before we were married, and we had been married almost 23 years at that time. I immediately detached myself from the situation. I was a social worker, have a degree in social work, and I thought, well, I can fix this. I've helped other people, and I can help my family too. Then I realized that he didn't want help, and he wasn't going to get help. He didn't want any help from anyone. He was too prideful. He had stolen most everything from our house. He stole all of our electronics, all instruments that we had in the house, anything that was of worth, all my jewelry. He went through all of our savings, all of our retirement, everything that we had put in accounts for our boys' college, their savings accounts, everything was gone. And I really didn't know what to do other than to go out and find a job. He left in February of 2012 for the last time, and my pastor told me that it was time for me to call in my family. I had not told my parents what was going on because I was very ashamed of what had happened. And I called my brother, and he was there the very next day, and he stayed a week and tried to make the situation a little bit more stable for my children. My husband at the time had struggled with pornography before and during our entire marriage. We had gone to counseling, but he always would talk to the counselor and tell her or him that he was cured and that he was delivered from this addiction and that he was sorry. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to have a happy family, and I believed him every time that he would say this. When all of this happened, I found out that he had spent all of our money, and I researched online what he did with the money, and I found out that he had been seeing Craigslist escorts, and he had also been using drugs with all these women. I trusted somebody for 30 years, and he didn't cherish and love me or respect me or my marriage vows with him. I just kept thinking that it had to be a mistake, that it really couldn't be happening. It was like a really bad movie that I was watching on TV, but it was my reality, and it was the reality my kids were going through. I felt really dirty and scared and alone, and I just didn't know what to do. So I leaned on my pastor. I leaned on God. I knew that I was at a crossroads in my life regarding my faith, that I had always told people that, you know, God's going to get you through situations, and that He's always with you. He's always faithful. But when it happens to you, it's a little bit harder because I didn't understand why He would do this to us, to Himself, to His kids, to the churches that He had been at, to the people, the ministry. I just didn't understand. I've had to deal with a lot in my life, a lot of issues: anger, grief, rejection, inferiority, abandonment, betrayal, lies, isolation, depression, low self-esteem, suicidal thoughts. I see a Christian counselor now. I'm involved in a ladies group. I've taken antidepressant. I'm not ashamed of that. I read my Bible and I journal daily. I know that God is going to do great things in my life and that He's going to use my experiences to help other women. I still attend the church that we were at, and I'm now employed there as a children and youth minister. I also work at a middle school, so I have 2 full-time jobs. I know that God has brought me through this devastating and painful experience for a purpose. Psalm 56:8 says that God collects all of our tears and stores them in a bottle. Not one of them has He missed. It also states, 2 Corinthians 1:4, that God comforts us in our troubles so that we can also comfort those in their times of trouble. And I just feel like I had a choice to lay down and die and give up, or a choice to take Jesus by the hand and just let Him carry me through it. And I know it might sound odd, but I'm really grateful for the experience, because I know that I spent so many years trying to be my husband's Holy Spirit and try to convict him and try to catch, try to check up on him and try to keep him doing what he was supposed to do. And I'm not God, and I can't do that. And I was exhausted by doing that, and now I'm able to focus on my relationship with God, and I'm grateful. I'm not happy of what happened, because it was very painful for me and for my children. But I know that I wouldn't be where I am today in my walk with God if I hadn't been through it. So for that, I'm grateful. And that's my story.
Hi, my name is Sherry, and I am 58 years old. In my healing, I've been walking in for about 15 years. Just to start out, when I was a child, we lived in a very strict independent Baptist home. From ages 1 to 12, I don't remember most of my history. I have all the symptoms of being sexually abused. Not sure who the person was, but it's part of my past, and I don't remember it, and it hasn't been brought to my attention yet. And from 12 to 18, I was in public schools, and I was overweight as a child, and I was picked on all the time and called fatty and all the names that you get called until you got out of high school. And then Mom and Dad transferred me to a Christian school, and it got a lot better there. It wasn't as bad. And then when I was 18, I went to school at Bob Jones, very strict. And nothing really started to happen in my life till I graduated from Bob Jones. And the first year I was out, I went and moved into an apartment. I met a guy that was a bartender, and that was where my stuff started as far as going to bars and going out. And for 20 years, I went away from the Lord. Actually, by the time I really looked at it, I don't think I really knew the Lord during that time. I had been taught enough about the Bible to realize the fear of God, and always knew that there was a call in my life. I always knew that God had a plan. But when you don't really know Him and you just know the legalism, it's very easy to get off into a different lifestyle than what you should be living. And so I got involved with several guys, and because my dad was like an absent father, he was never home. Of course, when a girl's like that, she starts looking for men to fill that space, and so sexually it became very active. It was nothing for a different guy every week, just to be with somebody, just to have the touch, just to feel the love. And this went on for years and years. I never did get involved in drugs, but the alcohol was getting pretty bad. I got pregnant to someone, and he does not to this day know that I was pregnant. and we were in a plane. My dad was a pilot, and we had flown up to Pennsylvania, and he had calculated the weight of the plane correctly when we left, but when we came back, my grandmother wanted to come back with us. I knew that I was going to have to make a decision when I got home, what I was going to do, whether I was going to keep the baby or have an abortion. So we got in the plane and we headed back to Greenville and got in the air, and Dad said, "Oh my gosh." And before we knew it, we had crashed. We got up pretty high, and then when we came down, the back end of the plane hit a stump in the ground and broke in half, and my grandmother was killed, my mom's mom. My mom ended up in the hospital for 6 weeks. Me and Dad were the only ones that weren't really hurt. And when I got back to Greenville, within a week or two, I went and had an abortion. And of course, you think it's nothing, and everybody tells you it's nothing, you know, but in the process of the abortion, I came to. And in that, I made vows and judgments about no man will ever do this to me again, and all kinds of things that started operating in my life after that. When I was 42 years old, it was to the point of suicide because I just couldn't deal with the pain anymore. Just too much between Dad and whatever happened to me as a child. And so I told the Lord, I said, "You've got 3 months to show me what I'm missing, because obviously there's something that I don't know that I need to know." And I said, and after that 3 months, I'm going into the world and I'm not coming back. And so nothing happened. Nobody invited me to church. Nobody invited me to Bible study, nothing until like almost the last day of the 3 months. And my next door neighbor, Marcia, came over and she said, "Sherry, we've got this prophet coming to our church, and I think you would like to hear her and see what she says." Well, I get there, and the place, air conditioning wasn't working. It was so hot. And I stayed as long as I could, and then I finally left. And Marcia called me the next day, and she said she was looking for you. And see, nobody knew what I was going through. Nobody knew the pain, and nobody understood. No, I mean, I talked to nobody at that point in time in my life. And so she said, "Will you take a phone call from her?" And I said, "Yeah, you know, sure." I was at the house where I was living. She called me, and by the time she was done, I was on the floor bawling, because everything that I had asked the Lord for or told the Lord about, she answered every one of the questions, you know, that there was a call on my life and everything. So at that point in time, I told her, I said, "But I've done so many things wrong. The Lord cannot use me, and, you know, I'm basically dirty and filthy and whatever." And she said, "The Lord can use anybody." So at that point, I knew I had to make a decision. And so I had decided, you know, that the life that I was living wasn't working anymore, and so I needed to try something else. And so at that point in time, I got my life straightened out with the Lord and got saved. And there's a huge difference between Him being your Savior and Him being your Lord. And at that point, I made Him the Lord of my life, and that I knew that I had to walk in obedience. But the thing that was interesting is that He didn't move me out of the situation. He made me stay there for 2 years. At the end of those couple years is when I met my husband, Randall. And the thing of it is that I knew with Randall, I had to tell him everything. I had to tell him my whole lifestyle. I couldn't just tell him the parts, because there was like 10 years in there I didn't tell him. And the second date, when I went home that night, the Lord said, "This is the man you're going to marry, and he needs to know everything that has happened in your life." I said, "Okay." So the next day I said, "I've got something I have to tell you." And he said, "I think I know what it is, but I'm not going to judge you. I just have some questions." I told him, and I fell in love with him because he accepted me. I got married when I was 45. I'm 58, so that was 13 years ago. So I've walked a lot of this healing out. I've walked a lot of what I've been through in those years. And I think that the older you get in the healing, the stories change, because you learn to be like Him, and He teaches you, you know, He puts you in situations, not the ones you chose to walk to, but He puts you in different situations to grow you more and more to be like Him. And I know that He loves me, and I know that He has a plan for me, and the scriptures have come to life, and now I'm walking out the healing and turning around and helping other people. And so that's my real story.
I didn't really have a biological, the ordinary parents that you would have in a biological sense. But instead, God blessed me with amazing grandparents. My mother, who was an angel and a light to everyone, suffered from bipolar disorder from very, very young age. And when I was 5, she took her life. My father was never in the picture. He was a drug addict and an alcoholic, and he would beat her, and shortly after my mother took her life, he signed his rights away. But God blessed me with so much support and so much love from two amazing people who unfortunately lost a second child when I was 12 years old, my uncle. And just seeing them grow and just seeing the way that they worship and love God has given me so much strength. I received Christ when I was about 9 years old at a Bible camp. And since then, you know, in my middle school and high school and college years, beginning of my college years, I'm still in college, I didn't know exactly what it meant to have a relationship with Christ. Like, I knew I'd been saved and I went to church and I knew I loved the Lord. But there were certain areas of my life that I hadn't fully surrendered to Him. My grandparents gave me a purity ring when I was 16 years old. And that purity ring I wore for so many years, and I've kept its promise, and I'm still keeping its promise, even though it's not on my finger anymore. My second semester of my freshman year of college, I never really gave much thought to guys in my life because I was always, you know, I'm going to make good grades and I've got my music. And I ended up meeting this guy who I knew he wasn't a Christian, and I thought I could change him. And I ended up starting to really have feelings for this guy. And so what ended up first was me trying to change him. He ended up changing me in a lot of ways. And we entered a very sexually manipulative as well as emotionally abusive relationship. The last time I saw him, he got very close to taking my virginity. And I told him no. I couldn't. And so I left that day, and that was the last time I saw him, and shortly after he broke up with me, and that was the reason why. For many months after I fell into this deep depression, I couldn't understand why I felt so much pain and so much loss, and just I felt like trash, essentially, for doing what I thought was the right thing. I had given him so much of myself, except for that one part. I couldn't let myself see that what I'd done was actually the best thing for me. And so I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I lost all interest in my classes, my friends, and the devil really spoke to me, and he said, "You are worthless. You have nothing. You are never going to be loved." And I remember sitting on my bed one day and just him speaking to me so loud and saying, "End it now. Just do it. Just end it." And I had thought in my mind, you know, well, my mom did it. Why shouldn't I? And as soon as I said those words, it was like this presence came over me, and God spoke to me and said, "You are my child, and I love you, and I will provide for you, and I have so much more for you than this." And so I equate that day with really the day that I essentially started growing a relationship with Christ. After that, I met Jeremy. And Jeremy had just rededicated his life like I had to Christ. And, you know, we were walking together and growing in the Lord. And I fell in love with his family, and I fell in love with his faith. And he became my best friend, and I found myself falling just so in love with him. And I couldn't believe, like, God had brought me through so much, and that he had sent me Jeremy to go through this with me in my life. And the longer we were together, the more I could see this future, and I saw a marriage, and I saw kids. And June 23rd, 2014 is the day that for many months I believed my world had ended. Jeremy went home to be with the Lord that day. And I became so angry with God. Like, you had just brought me through this last year. Why are you bringing me through this? But it's even worse. And so many things, so many times I had prayed to God in our relationship, and he had showed me that this was the guy I was supposed to be with, and I couldn't understand why he had took him away from me. And I began to see myself falling into a more deeper and harder depression than what I had faced just the year before. Even though I wasn't as physically drawn down, I was leading worship at my school's Bible study. I was going to church. I was spending time with my family, with his family. I would go home every night, and I felt so alone. And many nights, I just felt captive by something that was consuming me, and I had no idea what it was. And just recently, in the past month, God has begun to release all these burdens, and he's been showing me that the real thing that had consumed me the year before, and with losing Jeremy, was fear. And I had forgotten that perfect love cast out all fear. I had so many fears just about never loving again, just losing, forgetting Jeremy, and never having the life we talked about, and never being able to stop having this pain. And God has just shown me that, yes, I don't know my future, and I don't know what's going to happen next, but I know who holds my future. He's given me 4 amazing, beautiful brothers, and a whole new set of parents, and just beautiful, beautiful friendships that have come out of all of this, and so much love that he has filled my heart and filled my spirit with. There's one verse that's really helped me through all of this. It's 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 10. And he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I will take pleasure in my infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, in persecution, in distress for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." There's a time for everything, and I do believe that there's a time for grieving, and I'm still very much in that time for grieving. But I don't have to be afraid, and I can boast in my grief, because in my grief, he has made me strong. And this is my story.